The diesel engine of the tow truck let out a low, guttural rumble as it halted in front of a pristine colonial home on Maple Ridge Drive. Suspended from thick chains was a bright blue portable toilet, gently swaying in the soft morning breeze. The truck's hydraulics hissed as the unit was carefully lowered, straight into a well-manicured rose garden that had won neighborhood awards. Just as it touched down with a muffled thump beside a bed of American Beauty roses, the front door flew open and Karen came charging out. Her scream pierced the quiet morning, prompting half the street to twitch back their curtains. The Porta Potty's door creaked ominously in the wind, revealing the pitch-black interior like something out of a horror movie. But let me rewind for a moment. I'm David. A few months ago, I bought a vacant half-acre lot in the Oakwood Estates neighborhood. A perfect corner parcel where I planned to build a modest, single-story house for my retirement. I followed every protocol: permits, designs, neighborhood introductions, everything done by the book. The land had been ignored for years. Tall weeds, garbage from passing cars. It was an eyesore. I figured the neighbors would be glad to see it cleaned up. Every weekend I spent hours clearing junk, trimming brush, and hauling debris, all within HOA-approved hours. I avoided Sundays completely. That's when I first caught Karen's attention. Karen lived 3 doors down, in the largest, most polished house on the block. Early 50s, always in pearls and stiff hair that never moved. She was the self-declared monarch of Oakwood Estates. As HOA president for 6 years, she enforced the rules with thinly veiled malice, wielding passive-aggressive emails and official citations like weapons. The first time we met, I was stacking dead branches into my truck. She crossed the street with the authority of a building inspector, clipboard in hand, heels ticking on the pavement. With a thin smile, she informed me that my activities were visually disruptive to the neighborhood's aesthetic. When I pointed out I was clearing junk, not creating it, she replied that even improvement can be destabilizing. When I asked who had complained, she offered a smug, "That's confidential." The first citation arrived the following week. Apparently, I had violated some code by allowing construction debris to be visible from the road for more than 4 hours. It was referring to the exact same pile of branches I was loading when Karen ambushed me. The fine was $75. I paid it, hoping to keep things civil. That was a mistake. Over the next month, the citations rolled in like clockwork. My truck was 2 inches over the property line. The cones I used for safety were the wrong shade of orange. I failed to submit some obscure form before removing a rotting tree stump. Each violation was more ridiculous than the last. And every time I tried to resolve it with Karen, she'd flash that insincere smile and say, "Rules are rules." Then one Tuesday morning, I arrived to find a massive blue porta potty sitting dead center on my property. Not tucked away out of sight, no. It was parked exactly where my foundation was supposed to go. It was the deluxe Model 2, white roof, vented door, bright blue walls. It stuck out like a beacon on the now cleared land. I called the number on the unit. The rental company said it was ordered by Karen Peton on behalf of the HOA for preemptive sanitation compliance. When I explained there was no construction happening yet, they shrugged, figuratively, and said the lease was for 6 months, paid in advance. I stormed over to Karen's. She answered the door dressed like a department store mannequin, perfectly coiffed, business casual, dead-eyed. She informed me, with exaggerated concern, that she'd received several complaints about the lack of restrooms on my site. I reminded her, again, that construction hadn't started. She quoted Ordinance 12.6.6, which allegedly required sanitation on site before work began. She smiled and said I should be grateful the HOA had covered the expense through emergency funds. If I wanted it moved, I'd need to submit a formal request, Form 81C naturally, and wait for the board to review it. Next meeting? 3 weeks out. So I waited. Every visit to my lot, I had that ridiculous plastic monument looming in the middle of it. It wasn't just inconvenient, it was a statement. Karen had claimed territory. But Karen made one critical misstep. I'd been documenting everything. Every citation, every phone call, every conversation. When I requested a copy of the rental agreement through HOA channels, something jumped out at me. The Porta Potty lease wasn't under the HOA's name. Karen had signed for it personally. She'd used her own credit card. That meant, according to the rental company's terms, she was legally responsible for its placement and could authorize changes in location, or anyone with her written approval. And guess what else I had with her signature on it? All the citations she'd issued, on HOA letterhead, signed and dated. That's when I called my cousin Mike. He runs a towing and equipment transport business over in Riverside. I showed him the lease, the citations, and Karen's signature. He reviewed everything, grinned, and said, "Oh yeah, I've got you." Which brings us back to this morning. As Karen stood in her doorway, screaming at the top of her lungs while the porta potty settled into her rose garden, I stood across the street sipping coffee. Mike's guys had delivered it legally, with a signed document and chain of authority traced directly to Karen. The best part? I didn't touch a thing. I just made sure the right people saw the right paperwork. And Karen? She can file Form 81C if she wants it moved. The board meets next month. Early one Thursday morning, around 3 a.m., I met up with Mike to help move some construction gear for a relative. Mike showed up at my lot with his flatbed truck, equipped with a crane designed to haul heavy machinery. After carefully positioning the vehicle, he began securing the load, an eye-catching blue portable toilet. With practiced ease, he lifted it like it weighed nothing, and within 20 minutes we were cruising the quiet streets of Oakwood Estates, the porta potty gently swaying behind us. Our destination was Karen's immaculate corner lot home, famous in the neighborhood for its flawless landscaping. She'd won so many HOA Yard of the Month awards they'd practically retired the title in her honor. Her lawn was a masterpiece of crisp diagonal mowing patterns, and her rose garden had once been featured in the local paper. We placed the porta potty just inside her property line, barely touching the edge of the lawn but clearly visible from the street. Mike lowered it with expert precision, placing it exactly 18 inches from her prized David Austin roses. As a final flourish, he attached a small solar-powered light to the roof, so the whole thing glowed a soft blue all night. I took plenty of photos to document its position, careful to show it wasn't blocking any walkways or violating local codes. By 6:45 a.m., I was parked across the street with my coffee waiting. At exactly 7 o'clock, Karen stepped outside in her usual work attire, designer bag in hand. She got about halfway to her car before she noticed the object on her lawn. Her scream echoed down the block. It was everything I could have hoped for. She stood frozen in disbelief before charging toward the unit, as if she could will it out of existence. Seconds later, she was on her phone, pacing and waving her arms. I could only imagine who she was calling. The rental company, the HOA board, maybe even the police. But here's where it gets good. Turns out the rental company had documents showing that someone with her signature had requested the porta potty be relocated. They verified that yes, Karen Peton had full authority over the placement. Her insistence that she hadn't approved anything was met with polite reminders of that signature. By 8 a.m., curious neighbors were cruising by for a look. Mrs. Henderson from down the street even paused her morning walk to snap a photo. Meanwhile, Karen was practically shaking with fury, still trying to find someone to remove it. The rental company told her a relocation would cost extra, and since the unit had already been moved from its original site, she'd need to pay up front. When the police arrived around 9 o'clock, I watched as Karen pleaded her case. The officer took notes, nodded, and ultimately informed her that since the unit was on her land, leased in her name, and not breaking any laws, it was a civil matter, not criminal. That night's emergency HOA meeting was the most crowded in Oakwood Estates history. Word had spread quickly, and the community room was packed. Karen chaired the meeting, looking tense and furious. She opened with an emotional claim that I had deliberately vandalized her yard. She wanted swift punishment, legal action, and the harshest fines possible. But then something unexpected happened. Tom Morrison, usually one of Karen's yes-men on the board, asked to review the original rental documents. As the papers passed from hand to hand, the room's atmosphere shifted. Questions started flying. Why had Karen paid for an HOA expense with her personal credit card? Why had she moved the unit onto my lot without board consent? And what emergency funds was she referring to? Karen started to stumble over her words. Margaret Chun, the HOA treasurer, opened her laptop and checked the financial records live during the meeting. Her frown deepened with every click. She announced she couldn't find any board approval for the rental or the fund transfer. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Then Mr. Petrov, an elderly resident who'd lived in the neighborhood since it was built, stood and, in his thick accent, said he'd waited 2 decades for someone to challenge the little tyrant. The room erupted in nervous laughter, and suddenly, grievances started pouring out. Stories of citations for absurd infractions, rigid enforcement of arbitrary rules, and the atmosphere of fear Karen had cultivated. By the end of the meeting, 3 decisions were made. First, the HOA would take no action against me regarding the Porta Potty incident. Second, a full financial audit would begin immediately. And third, a special election would be held in 2 weeks to determine whether Karen should remain HOA president. For the next 17 days, the Porta Potty stood like a blue monument on Karen's lawn. Every morning she came out, glaring at it like it might vanish under her gaze. She tried everything, calling different companies, appealing to the city, even trying to push it off her property one evening, which several neighbors caught on video. But the rental company wouldn't budge. The fee to move it early was $847, and without payment, it was staying put. Karen tried to get the HOA to cover the cost, but the board, cautious now with the audit underway, refused without documentation. And then something strange happened in Oakwood Estates. The neighborhood changed. People who had stayed silent for years began speaking up. The ballot for the special election included not just Karen's removal, but amendments to reduce HOA power and increase transparency. Yard signs popped up in support, something Karen used to punish immediately. On the morning of the election results, I sat in my usual spot across from her home. The Porta Potty still stood, a bit dusty now. Karen stepped outside, but the polish was gone, her perfect hair slightly frazzled, her wardrobe toned down. She already knew. Out of 147 votes, only 12 supported her. The proposed reforms passed with huge margins. Later that day, Margaret Chen revealed the preliminary results of the audit. Karen had been siphoning HOA funds for personal use for years, just over $38,000 in total, spread across 6 years. Not enough for major prison time, but enough to destroy her reputation and career. The DA's office got involved, and charges were filed. Embezzlement and abuse of fiduciary trust. When Karen was formally charged, she finally paid to have the Porta Potty removed. I watched as the same company that delivered it hauled it away. Karen stood in her doorway, arms folded, overseeing the process like she still had some control. Our eyes met across the street, and I raised my coffee cup in a wordless toast. She slammed her door in reply. Her plea deal included probation for 2 years, 6 months of community service, and repayment of all stolen funds. She also agreed never to serve on any HOA board again. At sentencing, she wore a plain gray suit, no flashy jewelry, no confidence. As the judge lectured her on the violation of trust, she swayed slightly, but stayed on her feet, expression tight. When it was over, she walked out with court officers, eyes locked straight ahead, dignity cracked but intact, at least on the outside.